Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Collision Vision, driven by Auto Body News. As always, I'm your host, Cole Strandberg. Today, we continue our MSO Chronicles series with a guest who has high-level experience with a national consolidator and decided to make the jump into entrepreneurship to build his own regional MSO. Chris Ray is the owner of 122 Collision, an Atlanta-area MSO with 3 locations and growing quickly, like more than doubling in size by the end of the year quickly. Today, we're going to talk about Chris's story, the perfect attributes of an MSO leader, growth strategies, OEM certifications, and a whole lot more. Enjoy the show. This episode is sponsored by Hunter Engineering. At Hunter Engineering, the theme behind all their products is do it right, do it once. So when you're doing alignments, the time to find hidden damage is before you start, not after. The workflow for Hunter's collision alignment system surfaces the trouble right up front by providing 5 additional collision-specific measurements, like toe out on turn, maximum steer, and ride height, to find the problems right away. It's all about efficiency, so find the damage before it finds you. To learn more about Hunter's collision alignment system, visit hunter.com. Enjoy the show. Chris Ray, thank you for joining us here on the Collision Vision.
Hey, cool. Thanks, man. I appreciate it. Appreciate the opportunity.
Looking forward to a fun conversation. I talked a little bit about your background at the top of the show, and I've heard your name in the Southeast for many, many years. But could you tell us your story in your own words?
Yeah. So I'm, probably 22, 25 years into the industry, primarily that being in the Southeast, honestly, about 20 years of that with a larger MSO, and was a part of that group as they really started to expand. And I guess I was kind of fortunate to be in a market where there were only 10 locations in the Southeast. So to grow and expand in the Southeast and to be a part of that group was it was really fortunate for me because it really gave me a lot of exposure and a lot of I guess really it was a lot of learning on how to grow a business and kind of get into some of these other markets. And I feel like at this point, if you're in the Southeast, we've crossed paths somewhere in this industry. And but it was a role that I had really for over the 20-year period, going from whether it's being a technician to being an estimator, to parts, to production, to general manager, regional managers, everything all the way up to a regional vice president and officer of the company, which probably came to life somewhere around 2013, 2014. But, being with a group that's got to, really focused on high growth, really got me a lot of exposure in the entire Southeast region, and being a part of that group and being an officer of the group got me a lot of high level exposure with how we kind of looked at things holistically as a company in North America, and where we would target growth and where we needed to really create some burning platforms and focus attentions. So it's been a great ride for me. Great career.
No doubt about it. Awesome background, awesome experience. Let me ask you this: at the kind of the peak with that national consolidator, how many stores were under your ultimate management?
I would say at any given point in time, a peak number might have been like 102, 115, something like that. And then as that market might grow, you find it necessary to kind of cut out a section of it and create a new market or create a new territory. And that's one of the challenges with the growth, even, from a very high level down to some more of your district guys, regional guys. When does a market become standalone in a new market, right? And when do we add another body or split this workload up, right? And so
Sure.
overall, I would average, north of 80 stores, but it seemed like every time it got into the hundreds, we would try to make a split somewhere, right? And,
Sure.
and shift a little bit. So,
Man, so some real scale, and that had to give you some real confidence when it came time to go out on your own. And I want you to tell us about 122 here in a little bit, but before we do that, what motivated you to pursue that entrepreneurial path within the collision repair industry? Is that something you've always sort of had the itch for, or opportunistic?
yeah, no, I think, I had a commitment to myself that, quite frankly, by the time I turned 40 years old, I was going to open my own brand. That was always kind of lingering in the back of my mind. I'm going to get to a certain point, and I know that I want to have my own brand. And I missed that number by a couple of years, by about 3 years, but it was still kind of in that timeline. And honestly, I think there was for me to jump out there, I was really at a point where I felt like my current professional life just wasn't working for me. And I had known that for certainly for about 3 years, that like it was on a path that just wasn't for me. It wasn't that the company was, a bad company or the best company. None of that really mattered to me. I just knew that I had enough belief, I guess, in myself at that point to really trust my vision for what I wanted to create and kind of get out there and do it. So, and it just sort of fell on right at the time that the pandemic really onset in the US, like in 2020. And so I kind of, dialed back a little bit thinking, all right, man, what's the next for business in general, right? Because there's no
Sure.
playbook on this that gets rolled out, right? So, and about that time of the pandemic, the company holistically was kind of shifting anyway with CFO, COO, CEO. There was a lot of shift going on, and so that was in itself kind of exciting. About all right, well, what's this brand or this company going to look like here in the next, next year, next 2 years, next 3 years. And I think that really had me kind of sit tight for a minute to really kind of figure that out. And, ultimately, about 2 years into kind of the new alignment of the company, I still felt like it really wasn't aligned with what I was trying to achieve. Not that it was wrong. It just simply wasn't a path that I was, interested in going down.
Sure. Well, that's what's interesting. I think it's a good point. If you have that entrepreneurial itch, it really doesn't necessarily matter how great the company is, how great the role is, how great your people are. Sometimes you have to do whatever it takes to scratch that itch and go out on your own. And it's a cool story to hear. And you did it. Talk to us about 122 and where it is today.
So 122, we launched actually in July of 22, and so we're about 2 years into the brand. We currently have 3 open locations, the third one having opened a little bit earlier this year. We entered into the collision sector via 2 acquisitions. Really, did a kind of a lot of homework prior to even launching the brand on whether or not my path would be that of an acquisition, a brownfield or a greenfield type project. And I knew I certainly wanted a mixture of them. It was critical for me to really consider acquisitions first and foremost, just to, quite frankly, as a independent owner operator, like cash flow, right? Cash is king. So really trying to source out a couple of opportunities there in order to generate, cash flow from day one was really critical for me. In the background, I was really focused on a lot of brownfield opportunities because quite frankly, I mean, honestly, at the end of the day, the best return on invested capital right now, and it has been for a while for me, is even in my prior life, looking at brownfield opportunities. The So I had already started really working kind of in that real estate sector to identify buildings that were going to be a little bit easier to get into, less special use permits, less rezoning, maybe met some of the criteria of the footprint. You have your ideal box. If you could place that box on top of this real estate you're looking at and you're meeting, 75, 80% of what you're trying to achieve as it pertains to how you want to lay the box out, you have a lot less financial restraints to really go in and reconfigure this thing. So we started targeting, some of that in the background while we were just doing the acquisition piece. And so in the background, there were already 5 other projects really on the docket, right? And then I added a couple of more via the greenfield piece, or just building from the ground up, finding land that is properly zoned and high, like anybody else, I'm looking for markets that are kind of high growth or heavily consolidated. So a lot of residential stuff there, a lot of infrastructure in place that kind of creates that, live here, work here, play here type environments. So they seem to have a really good draw, in and around the Atlanta market for, high growth, high residential growth and business growth. So all the infrastructure's in place. You can kind of see what's coming. It makes sense to put a collision center here. And so really in the background, we have 3 open right now. We have but 6 projects going on right now, outside of the 3 that are already opened, that are either being converted into a collision center or being built from the ground up.
Man, big time growth, and just in a few short years. Got to ask, where does the name come from?
So 122 kind of just, I'm gonna give my wife credit for this, because I had a different name, different brand, everything picked out and everything drawn up by a graphics company. And I was looking at it one day on my desk at the office and at the house, and she walked by and she said, "What is that?" And I was like, "Well, I think that's going to be my branding, my logo." And I'm not going to tell you what she said, but she felt like that wasn't very cool about that. So she's like, "You need something a little more modern, something with some numbers in it." And I just jokingly said, "Well, just kind of name it after my last day of my last employer." And she's like, "Well, when was that?" And I was like, "Well, that was 122. And she's like, "Yeah, that's it." So
That's the one.
Kind of how 122 came about. And honestly, I went back and kind of rewrote the branding and the scripting behind it, and thought about, if I was going to roll with this, like what would be the meaning behind that. And for me, like 122 is just, it might have been my last day at my last employer, but it's kind of the new chapter, right? And
Yep. Fresh start.
Yeah, exactly. So it kind of represented to me the ability to kind of get out there and do this on my own.
Awesome. Very cool. Well, again, love the story. You have a ton of experience running multiple shops with multiple layers of management. Like, you had to feel really good jumping into entrepreneurship, despite the fact that, always some jitters. Were there any challenges that you didn't expect in doing this and kind of building from day one, and enlighten us on those?
Yeah. So I think, some of the challenges immediately, from, I spent a lot of time really modeling this out before I went and pulled the trigger on my first acquisition, for myself. As many acquisitions, as many projects as I've been involved in for years, it's a very different animal when it's yours, right? And it's let's be honest, it comes down to quite often the dollar and cents and what kind of cash flow there's going to be to really, get this thing off the ground and keep it moving forward. So I felt like I did a great job at identifying, what some of those obstacles were. I probably spend more time kind of on the due diligence side and modeling out and putting together a pro forma for me to meet an expectation. So when I go into kind of a growth mode, I'm looking at, where I plan on this business being, every quarter, through a 24-month run rate and on. And so I'm really conscious of kind of some of those lost cost startup pieces that maybe maybe a lot of people don't think about. I know it's ugly to look at, but you got to project, that growth and that ramp up and where, and make sure that you're meeting your own objectives. So I think that a lot of my hurdles I was able to avoid, I guess, just by being really diligent on the front end about mapping this out financially, each month, where I felt like, what was our expectation? What was that going to put to the bottom line? What could I use that bottom line for? What could I, move forward on? But I just done a lot of research about who I was going to align myself with, how we were going to model this, and how we were going to get this thing off the ground. All the preparation in the world doesn't necessarily change, that feeling as an owner when you're laying there at night, like, man, we've got to kick this thing in high gear. Like, especially me, when I'm probably a little too quick as an individual to say, okay, we're going to go ahead and do this one. I'm closing on this next business later this year. By the way, I've already bought this land over here, or I'm going to acquire these buildings next year, so all that stuff's mapped out. And so I think that growth for an individual, I probably just created my own hurdles by maybe being a little too aggressive out of the gate, maybe, so even though I felt like it was way mapped out, but, I try to, a good deal is a good deal, right? And you want to strike while the iron's hot. You don't want it to get away. So
opportunistic. Absolutely. Yeah. No, that's awesome. And we've talked about this a little bit in our pre-show call, but so many of the MSO leaders that I see jumping into the realm of entrepreneurship within collision repair are pretty quick to jump into it via a PE relationship, or at least pretty quickly get into a relationship with a private equity group. You haven't. Can you walk us through kind of that decision-making process and some pros and cons as well from your perspective? I think it's interesting.
Yeah, no, I spent several months, meeting with various private equity groups and having dialogue about what that looked like in order to, create capital quick, high growth models, and really understand, maybe what that would look like for me. And it's certainly, listen, it's an avenue that is for a lot of folks. And I'm not against it whatsoever, but I felt like, after talking with, several groups and kind of narrowing that field down to saying, okay, if I were going to do this, it's probably going to be, this group, or this group. So kind of having my top two, my top three. As I continue the dialogue, and maybe, one of the things that I did was reach out to, some CEOs that had realized their PE journey, right? And some that were currently engaged with private equity. And quite frankly, only one of those individuals was in the collision sector. Others were just in other business sectors. But but kind of just getting a background and understanding. One thing I asked every one of them was like, hey, if you had to do it all over again, or if you wished you would have known this, prior to going down this path, would it have changed the way you entered into, this sector, of growth and using private equity to get there? And honestly, I didn't hear anything that would necessarily derail me. But at the end of the day, for me personally, it felt like something that I wanted to wait on, because I know what my abilities are. I know that my path's going to take a little longer than having, a cash flow from a private equity group. But I know where I can get it. And I think that I can, if I decide to go down that path one day or recapitalize with a private equity group, I'll be in a much better position to leverage, my interest with the business, or even leverage a position within the company to kind of, look at what the future steps are. But at the end of the day, it keeps more control today for me to really build a brand that has a culture and has some runway behind it, that can be accomplished with rapid growth, but it's certainly a lot more difficult to create a culture, maintain it, keep it very healthy. If you're just, opening 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like if I'm going to pop 25 stores in a 2-year window, that's great. But, sometimes that growth can outpace the manpower and can really diminish the the culture that you're trying to build, the stability of the team that's there. And honestly, I would rather it take me, 4 years to get to that number than 2 years or a year, and have a very solid foundation to continue to build on. And then if I do make the decision to go down the path with private equity in the future, I'll have a much more valuable business. And, at the end of the day, if I'm going to sell a portion of it to anyone, then I want to be able to leverage the most control I can. And at the end of the day, maybe that's going to bite me. I don't know. I wanted to work for myself. So,
understood. No, it's a great answer and really good color to that thought process. And I think there are merits either way, but for what you value for right now, it seems your path is very much the right one.
Yeah. I mean, slow and steady for me is going to win the race. Although a lot of other independents have told me that it's not very slow, but it's slow to my prior life, and it's slow to a PE world, right? So
it is a fact, not slow. I see a ton of OEM certifications listed on the 122 website, and I want to dive into a little bit of that. One of the hottest topics in this space right now feels like there's this bubbling conflict between shops who are OEM versus shops who are traditionally DRP. How do you view OEM certifications in the success of your business?
I mean, for me, it's the success piece comes down to, it helps me stay really in tune with kind of some of the tooling, the equipment, the training, and, whether or not, you wanted to be full OE or DRP or whatever. Like, to me, it's just important that we know what we're working on, what the proper equipment is, the proper procedures, having access to those procedures, in order to get the car, honestly, just, put back together correctly. They're certainly not easy to work on. I mean, there's a lot of technology in these cars. And to me, it was just more about being aligned with a team that could truly identify or be a professional on the cars that they're touching, that they're working on, and having the resources readily available to identify how we should be repairing these cars. And so without some of the OEM certifications, it's not to suggest that a shop that's not OE certified is not any good. I mean, really being good at what you do comes down to the individual, right? You can be OE certified through the roof, but if you don't really use any of the resources or tooling and training that you have, it's all for nothing. So for me, it was more about making sure that we are engaged with what the vehicle needs. We are trained on what the vehicle needs. We do have the right tools and equipment. And quite frankly, it's somewhat to a degree like a little bit of a badge of honor, right? Versus, going to the guy next door who may be a great shop, but we have customers that come in all the time. And if they see, a specific plaque on the wall, even if they don't drive that particular vehicle, sometimes they feel a little more, I mean, literally I've heard people say like, well, if you can work on this car, you can handle my car, so it's kind of sometimes they get that sense there. But I think for me, it's just about doing, knowing that the team that's working on the car is certified to touch the car. And so, right now in the background, I think we're working on we're working on 4 other a little more highline manufacturers right now to add to the list. And the way I pick my OEM certifications, it's just kind of based on the demographics of where the shop is, right? I don't need a very high line, certification in this box if I'm primarily going to see these vehicles, right? And so we kind of focus based on what brands we're primarily working on. And then we use that to also build comfort with dealerships in the market that do not have collision centers. So it enables me to really go in and talk to a dealer principal about a product that they sell and say, listen, we're certified. And that's what this means, by the way. We don't just say we're certified. This is the curriculum. These are the tools. This is the equipment. These are the individuals that work here that, help meet this objective. And you got to know that when you move this vehicle from your dealership to here, like this is what you can expect and anticipate. So for me, it's a great tool for the customers to see. It's great for the dealer principals, large dealerships that don't have collision centers to feel a little more comfortable about giving you the opportunity. And so, but more importantly, I think when I kind of envisioned the collision industry holistically, a a lot of the data that's available now through the manufacturers, have shifted to things like, it's a little more defined, it's definite. Instead of saying we recommend or we suggest or might be a great idea, right? So a lot of that verbiage has been removed, and it really helps you kind of stay focused on how you should, approach the repair.
Man, it's all about doing it the right way, right? And any resources that allow us to better achieve that goal seem like a worthy investment. The ROI is a nice cherry on top as well. From an actual tactical going about obtaining OEM certifications, if you have a shop owner listening to us right now who just doesn't even know where to start, says, "Hey, I think OEs, I'm picking up what you're putting down. I think OEs are an important part of our future." What advice would you have for those shop owners who want to go ahead and get certified?
Yeah, so I mean, one, get certified in a car that you're going to commonly see in your shop first is always my approach, right? And there's no point in me going to get certification B if I'm seeing a lot of A in here. So I want to get focused on A, and then thinking about, there are a lot of third-party companies that have really kind of eliminated some barriers for independent owners to become certified. So take a look at the avenues out there that are available through third-party companies that manage these platforms for any specific brand, because it seemed to be a little more reliant back in the day on having kind of a dealership sponsored approach and having interest in the market from a dealership in order to even start that certification journey. Do your research on, the tooling and equipment that you have to have, and be very realistic about it. Some of these can get super pricey if you don't have the correct welders, the correct frame machines, an aluminum, space, or clean rooms, dustless systems. So take a look at what you're repairing, what the requirements are from the manufacturer from a tooling standpoint, and make sure that you're going to, be realistic about what you have today. If you have, something that's a bit dated, that's not going to kind of pass the inspection, or even if the lighting in the shop isn't, to where it needs to be in order for it to pass an inspection or test, start making some of those commitments to upgrading lighting, to bringing in the new welders, to looking at new frame equipment, or more of a dedicated fixture type system versus just a platform to use pinch welds and pull on. And look at these third-party companies that have really removed the barriers on getting at least certified, because like in a market like Atlanta, where a lot of the large dealerships for a lot of the attractive brands, they have collision centers, and trying to get a certification or a dealer sponsor for a specific brand that is going to be repairing cars, quote unquote, in your neighborhood, or at least in their territory, you're not really going to get the support, right? So if you look at some of these third-party companies, they're not necessarily going to guarantee you any kind of work out of it, but they can at least help you navigate through it, get you certified. And so there are several companies now that have really removed this whole barrier of trying to get a dealer sponsor, and at least you can get the ball rolling on your certification. You can become certified and then go to the dealership and say, listen, for those that don't have collision centers, we're certified here. And, we want to build a relationship with you guys. We want to be your preferred repairer, in this market. So at least that's been my approach. I'm not going to tell you it's the right way, but using some of these third-party companies can remove a lot of hurdles as far as getting that certification. And they have all the current tooling lists, so you can really make an educated decision whether or not you want to spend this money. How long is it going to take you to get this money back, right? So
Sure. Yep. Absolutely. Well, using that as a tool for growth, I love, and is a great segue into a couple of my next questions, which are about this scale and growth that you guys have achieved. And you mentioned it earlier. You might not feel like you're growing very quickly, but to look back in the time frame of what you have and what is set up is really cool to see. You mentioned primarily preferring, essentially from an ROI perspective, brownfielding and greenfielding. The biggest challenge I see with that is then kind of twofold, but number one is getting the talent. Number two is getting the business. How do you go about making 122 the employer of choice and then the body shop of choice for your different OE or insurance relationships? So we'll start with the talent piece first. How do you fill the shop with great technicians and a great team?
You know, in my little lull of where I worked in opening 122, I interviewed no less than 100 technicians. I interviewed 100 GMs, 100 estimators, and I really tried to get the feel of, what makes a great work environment or what attracts them to, an employer. And a lot of the things that I had targeted historically, with a larger company, I found out we're kind of missing the mark by just having a little more of a one-off thing. So I think, putting together an environment that people want to be a part of and just walk into and feel good about is really critical. Having a center that's a little bit dark or dingy or doesn't necessarily have a model or some kind of flow to it, or, you don't have to go overboard, but, at least, create an environment that people want to be a part of. And that certainly attracts individuals. And then when you think about, the individuals you're going to put in place, to me, it's always critical to hire a GM that, because at the end of the day, the people are going to show up to that box for the general manager. They're not showing up for me. They're not going to show up for a regional guy in the future. They're not going to, they're literally showing up for the individual that's with them there at that shop every day, working alongside them, helping them problem solve. So I think it's critical to put in a good management team. And quite frankly, if you want to attract great techs, you have to have a great writer, or at least out of the 100 guys I interviewed, it came down to estimating. They would, work in a bat cave as long as they got a good ticket to repair the car. So we really shifted gears on thinking about their approach. I really thought I was going to hear tools, equipment, this, but like the number one request from any given technician was making sure that the estimates reflected what they were doing to the car.
Very, very interesting. From a filling the shop with work perspective, what does that roadmap look like? You identify the right market, you identify the right building, you're in the process of equipping it. How do you is it chicken or the egg? How do you feel confident that this store is going to be productive pretty quickly?
There's models that work for me as it pertains to the amount of individuals that live in a market. If you look at I always kind of look at the county. And then I'll look at, any given city that I'm looking at within the county to see how many people are there. Again, what kind of growth's coming into that market? What is the infrastructure? What's the support like? But, there are, some key numbers for me. If there's 100,000 people in a 500 square mile area, and then 70,000 of them are living in this particular city, like there's going to be accidents, right? So, it's kind of easy for me to say, that's a no-brainer. I'm going to put a shop over there, right? And so, and I tend to target markets, quite frankly, that already have like the big five in them.
Sure. Yep. I was going to ask how you view that competition.
I mean, it's certainly competition. So this isn't, I don't want it to be mistaken for cockiness, but if I go into a market where the big five are, because, they have the ability to do a lot better job at advertising, promoting, and pushing. But, when it comes down to zoning in any municipality anyway, you're going to end up kind of close to another collision center anyway. So why not be around one of the big five? Because people are going to that area, that market anyway for, collision needs. And if your center's there, you just kind of become part of that row or that area, right? And I'm not building in their backyard by any shape of the imagination, but,
Sure.
Am I within, 5 miles, 10 miles, 3 miles? Yeah, absolutely. And I'll be honest with you, it makes it super easy to staff your location too. So
Makes sense. Makes sense. What's interesting, there are retail concepts, like collision aside, that say we don't really even have our own real estate department because we try to build near where Starbucks puts their stores. We're never going to have that real estate team. And so there's something to be said. These big five have big teams. They've done their market research. If they're there for a reason.
Yeah. And I think too, I look at other companies that are very successful, and by success, I mean, they open something and they don't close it. They did enough due diligence, right? There are certain big box stores out there out of the collision sector that may open up a store and then 6 years later move 3 miles over to the next corner and just leave an empty shell, right? And so, but there are a lot of great companies out there that do a really good job of understanding what the growth is going to look like, what the infrastructure is going to be like. And when you see certain brands put up, 100,000 plus square foot, 200,000 square foot, or 300,000 square foot of shopping and retail going in, and one of those particular brands, that I follow, when I see them going into a market, like I'm already looking at dirt, within 15, 20 miles of that place. So the truth is, so are the big five in the collision sector, right? They're already looking around there too. But I think, to get business to the door, I'm probably still a little bit old school in that, I'm going to go meet with every service department, every custom. I just try to partner with individuals that have a good business that could really complement mine, right? So if I'm going into this market and I see a guy that does a great book of business doing customization on cars, whether it's paint work, lifts, ground effect, whatever, it doesn't matter to me, right? If it's automotive driven, I'm going to go build a relationship with that individual. And if he's been there for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, or she's been there for 30 years, whatever, that's kind of a quick build in for them to start referring your business, right? When you start building a relationship with those individuals that have a lot more pull in a territory than the new guy that just showed up yesterday, right? So I typically look for a lot of fleet opportunity as well. And I don't mean necessarily through any fleet management company, but if I drive by a company that's got 200, white F-150 sitting on the lot with branding on the side, I don't just drive by, stop by, right? So for any of my startup, is typically going to be based on just a relationship in the market and probably landing some very localized fleets, or, maybe it's a big company that offers franchises and there's a guy down the street with 30 Silverados, whatever, but the point is they want to keep them clean. They want to keep them presentable. And it's just some built-in work, honestly, that allows me to get it off the ground and then start really marketing in that neighborhood, so to speak. And, my marketing approach is probably a lot like everybody else's, where, we're going to do, if it's a little more of a community type environment, we're doing a grand opening with the bounce houses and the fire trucks and everything else. And we're doing mailers that go direct out to individuals that we can kind of selectively pick based on the cars that they own, based on how many average cars per household, so I'm not spending money on just some broadcast. It's very targeted to a degree. And so if I can do a grand opening and have 300 or 400 people show up, to a store that's never been a collision center, then that kind of gets us out of the gates a little faster.
Heck of a start and some real momentum. And I love the just effort up front to do what it takes to get the word out. The marketing, we try to talk about a fair bit on the Collision Vision. A true sales effort is something that is not always associated with collision repair. And I think it's really interesting to go and meet with people in the market, meet with these centers of influence who either own, operate, or service in a different fashion these a lot of vehicles, right? I think that's really, really interesting, and kind of a do whatever it takes entrepreneurial mentality, which I love to hear. I want to ask a question that's going to get you a little introspective. It's going to feel like you're complimenting yourself. That's okay. But when I look at your resume and what you've done thus far with 122 and kind of the trajectory you're on, you're obviously very good at a number of things from a leadership standpoint, from an operating a multi-location business. What do you think you're uniquely good at? Or put a different way, what are the skill sets required for folks looking to follow in your footsteps?
I think if you're going to get into kind of a multi-shop operating piece, you got to get really, really good at hiring. I can't stress that enough. And I don't mean hire somebody based on, for me, and probably for a lot of individuals that may listen to this, if you're an independent owner, identifying somebody that can repair a car, put together a repair plan, order parts, whatever facet that you're hiring for, that's what you're hiring for. And I feel like, to me, it's easy to identify within a very short order whether or not, you made the right hire as it pertains to their skill set or what their ability to do. And I would just challenge you to hire maybe a little more based on some of their, personality traits in order to determine if it's an individual that you're going to be able to mesh with and work with. Because their skill set, like if you hire somebody to be an estimator, let's say, it's easy just to hand them a clipboard, before the interview starts and say, go out there and write me an estimate, right? And so you kind of know where their skill set's going to be based on just some quick little questions, or having somebody come in and paint or show me some of your past work, or, definitely check the references, definitely look at some of the characteristics of the individual and how they handle things. I'm always looking for individuals that can problem solve. And if I ask questions that gear, around their, a good response based on how they handle the situation or how they problem solve something, that's what I'm looking for. If the interview goes an hour, like, I'm probably not going to hire the individual. They give me the best answers in the world, but the reality is I don't have time to talk to somebody all day. I know that sounds awful, but I need people that are going to make a decision and continue to move, right? And so it can be the most polished professional individual, but if it takes you an hour to have an interview with me, or an hour to answer a question, if I ask one question and it's a 30-minute reply and I get like one probing question off of that, and it takes another 30 minutes, like the interview's over, because like you're great, but you're just not for me today. Not right now. I don't have time to sit around and think about it that way, right? So I'm looking so hiring to me is super critical. The ability to then kind of delegate to those individuals, so they help kind of carry the weight of the world. If I'm going to bed at night, laying there thinking about everything that I've got to do, and I haven't shared any of that responsibility with anyone, I'm probably not going to sleep at all, right? It's okay for me to go to bed thinking about it, but it's also okay for me to actually fall asleep and get up the next morning and know that we got this. So I think the ability to delegate and kind of follow up with individuals, and again, assign things that are appropriate to each individual. I have 3 stores, 3 GMs. I have 3 GMs that have very unique abilities, right? Some are better at this, some are better at this, and some are better at this. And so assigning them tasks for the company holistically, especially while we're on a growth path, is critical that I align the right guy or gal with the right task. So I think delegation is critical. Communication, really big on communication. I'm not big on like the email and the texting for me personally, with my team internally. Like, if you need me, call me. If you've got, 3 to 5 days, text me. And if you got 30 plus days, shoot me an email. It's very simple. So, it doesn't mean I'm going to answer the phone immediately, but I'll promise you, like, you're getting a call back right before the end of the day. So, like, I want to be able to, talk with my team one-on-one. And so we're a small company, but we still meet, every 30 days. And we kind of lay out everything in front of us, and the 4 of us sit in a room together and kind of problem solve whatever the key takeaways are. And then if we set up a measurement from the last 30 days, we measure it again. We continue to just keep our finger on the pulse on what we've identified that are important KPIs for us. So, which would be another great skill set, is just kind of being organized. What are you managing to? And to me, I don't like to get lost in the weeds and manage to a KPI that doesn't really yield me a good return, right? So we only manage to what's very specific, and I'm very black and white, man. So, like, if I have a dry erase board, I'm going to write value on one side and waste on the other.
Yep.
And waste to me is like no one's going to pay for. And so if there's anything I do today that nobody would pay a dime for, I just write it down, right? And if there's something happening in my store that nobody's going to pay a dime for, we write it down, and we try to really problem solve that or get it over to the value category, right? So and maybe that's a little bit too black and white, but right now for me, waste is just something nobody's going to pay for. And so, like, estimating, nobody pays for estimates. It's technically a waste, right? So how do you get that out of this industry, right? That's a huge one, right? Or particularly photo estimating. That's even worse, right? That's even less valuable. And so how do we problem solve that, or how do we counter that when holistically the industry's moved to photo estimating, right? Whether it's an insurance carrier or even shops offer it, right? And so how do you get around that? And how are we going to problem solve that when somebody walks in the front door with a $1,500 photo estimate, and, the front of the car's, over 15 millimeters or something, and you already know before you take it apart, it's $4,000. So how do we get around that? And those are real things we struggle with today, right? I struggle with that more than I do anything. People thinking it's only $1,200 or $1,000, or, because they have a photo estimate, and it's packaged as a convenience thing. You don't want to diminish it because, the customer's engaged with that. So, how do you take that and educate them without, over educating them, I guess.
Sure.
So we try to problem solve on things that are critical to our business. We have some long-term objectives that we think, the next 5 or 10 years may present. What are we working on today to be ready for that? And so we just sort of segment it, man. But I think that the hiring piece is the most critical, the ability to delegate to the individuals you've hired, the communication, and just overall organizational skills. If you want to have multiple shops, you got to be super organized, or a little both. You're going to work 24 hours a day.
Oh, yeah. Or at least be thinking about it 24 hours a day, right? Man, you continue to set me up with some great segues, though, because we've talked about your background in the past. We've talked about where the 122 organization is today. You mentioned those 5 to 10 year objectives. What's the future look like for 122?
We want to continue to grow in a space and a time that makes sense. We're a little bit more focused now on what I'll call I'm just going to call them like higher end pieces that do require some of the dealership sponsor stuff. So we're doing some centers that are going to be very focused on, say, referral basis from manufacturers or dealerships that offer very specific brands. So that's one of the key pieces, the continued growth. But like, where are we growing? Well, we're growing in markets where there's higher consolidation, maybe a little bit different caliber of a vehicle that's in that market. And so we want to be able to service those. So we stay very focused on equipping and building out these centers to meet those demands, so that, from day one, we already kind of cover the gauntlet of the tools and equipment. We start the training piece immediately. We have the relationship with the manufacturer or the dealership, of some very specific manufacturers to start loading the shop. So we're going to continue to grow on that piece. And then, what's the end game right now? I don't know. For me, we certainly have 4 more that will open this year, 2 definitely next year. And then I'm probably going to circle back around here, quite frankly, next quarter, and bring in some more acquisition opportunity into the mix. Because again, we have a lot of brownfield, 2 greenfield going on right now. And so we have to put the right mix of acquisition, or, the cash flow type pieces to help support that continued brownfield and greenfield projects. So but again, I can't stress enough, if you're an independent looking to expand, the brownfield opportunity, or finding that box that's easily converted into a collision center, is certainly the biggest return on your money, hands down. I mean, it's the best, in my opinion, to get into here. And new construction is great. Super expensive right now. Money's really expensive right now. So I think if you can pump the brakes on the new developments right now, I would, but I would focus on buildings. And I think there's ways to work with a lot of local, real estate investment trust or REITs out there that a lot of independents may not think about. They may think about some of the capital and like, how in the world am I going to pull this off? And I only have X dollars, or I do want to grow, or I do want to retool, I do want to equip. But, there is good debt, right? And there is a good way to leverage debt in order to grow your business. Very healthy. I'm not saying over leverage by any shape of the imagination, but using your capital to run your business, especially if you want to expand like I am. Like, my money's more important in the business, not in real estate, not in tools and equipment, not, having the money in order to acquire something and maybe lease it back to myself is fine. But, I'm always working with varying REITs in order to continue to expand. Right. And so and I can lock down stuff. And quite frankly, if you're like me and you're going to pull together a bigger package, you're a little more attractive with a portfolio that may include several properties they want. You can leverage a little better cap rate and save yourself a lot of money. So,
all great stuff on the real estate front. And I echo that. I think brownfielding and the ability to brownfield is really valuable and really important for a lot of growth, as long as you can check a lot of the other boxes: the ability to recruit good talent, the ability to generate business from scratch. A lot to like, for sure. But Chris, man, you have been very generous with your time. I've really enjoyed our conversation to this point. I do want to start wrapping up, and as you know, we like to end each episode of the Collision Vision with 3 key takeaways. A lot we talked about today, but what do you think those are from our conversation?
I think for, any of the independents out there listening and thinking about the growth, the key takeaways to me would be like, who are the partners you have today? And are they really aligned, or can they help, your company kind of get down that path, right? So whether it's a paint manufacturer, right, a supplier, whomever that is. So who are your partners today? What are they doing to help you get that second, third, fourth, fifth, 10th center up, whatever the scenario is? But, how are you aligning yourself with some of the partners that you do business with, and really picking your team? So it's not just an internal piece, but identifying the individuals externally that can help you kind of grow and get there. The other would be that you take a look at some of these, third-party kind of, contractors out there, that can offer these. I guess it kind of goes along with some of the partnership, but who can you work with, like varying certification companies to help you get over this hump, right? Because I really do think whether or not you're going to be super OEM eccentric, it's still critical that your team kind of know what's going on with these cars, right? And that their training, your tools, the continued support, be there for you to continue to grow, and just make sure that you have a really good foundation to build from. If you think you're great at what you're doing, that's great. But if you don't really have a kind of a mission, vision, and values outlined for your company, as you continue to grow, you could end up with, this box that you love, and you may end up with another box that kind of starts creating its own culture, and it may be doing well, but you need a solid foundation, a good business plan that it really identifies who your company is. Like I said, just very simple, kind of identify the mission, vision, and values, and don't let, perfection kill progress. You don't have to make this thing perfect right out of the gate, right? You're going to build to that, but just make sure that foundation stays solid. So.
Love it. And love that last line too. Don't let perfection kill progress. I think it's something that a lot of folks use as an excuse to not leap in. And you, sir, have certainly taken the leap, and look forward to continuing to watch you and your organization grow. Where can people follow along with 122 and connect with you?
Sure. Yeah. So, we've got 120-2.com. So the webpage, there's Facebook, or 120-2 Collision on Facebook. We've got Instagram feeds. There's and maybe even a little TV show that starts airing in August, where you can follow 122 if you dare. So it's
love that. Saw a little something about that coming up, which is excellent. Very exciting. Well, congratulations on the success to this point. I'll be sure to incorporate those links in the show notes as well, to make it super easy on listeners to give that one click. But Chris Ray, thank you so much for your time, and thank you for joining us here on the Collision Vision.
Hey, appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you again to Chris Ray, owner of 122 Collision, for joining us on today's show. The experience Chris got and the things he achieved professionally prior to diving into entrepreneurship is impressive, and it's created a great foundation for success on his own. I appreciate Chris's openness and willingness to share what amounts to, in my opinion, a mini MBA in growth within collision repair. Chris's 3 key takeaways were a lot about the people and the groups you choose to work with. And those takeaways were: number 1, ensure your partners are aligned. Your paint companies, your equipment vendor, your technology supplier. Get the ones who can help you the most, and be purposeful in picking your team. Number 2 was take a look at third-party contractors who can offer assistance on certifications. Chris is obviously very bullish on certifications, and they offer the right education and training to fix vehicles correctly. Additionally, they offer a nice way to bring in more business. Lastly, ensure your foundation is solid if you're looking to scale. Outline your mission, your vision, and your values to guide your growth, and don't let perfection get in the way of progress. That's all for today's episode. If you enjoyed it, please be sure to share it with your network and give us a follow wherever you enjoy your podcast or on YouTube, where the Collision Vision lives in video form. Be sure to tune in next week for another great MSO Chronicles episode. And as always, on behalf of the Auto Body News team and myself, thank you for coming along for the ride.